Autumn stared at the competition flyer like it was a tax audit notice. Metro Dance Championship. Grand prize, $50,000. $50,000, the exact amount she needed to save her family's dance studio from foreclosure. "You seriously considering this?" asked Paige, her best friend and the only instructor who hadn't jumped ship for the flashy studio downtown. "Sure. With what partner? Every decent dancer in Seattle already has a team." Autumn wadded up the flyer. "Unless you've got some secret dance prodigy hiding somewhere." That's when she saw him, marching across Pike Place like he was leading a board meeting, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than her car payment. Blake Morrison, the most ruthless corporate attorney in the Pacific Northwest and the very man trying to shut down her studio for Cascade Bank. Him. Autumn pointed without thinking. He'd actually worked perfectly. Paige nearly choked on her green tea. Blake Morrison? The guy who probably sanitizes his business cards? He won't even use the same pen as his clients. Absolutely true. Blake was legendary for his zero-contact approach. He kept all interactions strictly professional, avoided casual touches like the plague. And rumor had it he scheduled meetings specifically to avoid rush-hour elevators. "I was joking," Autumn muttered, but her devious mind was already spinning schemes. At that exact moment, Blake paused right in front of their sidewalk table, phone glued to his ear. "Mother, I've told you repeatedly, I don't have a girlfriend to bring to your charity gala. And no, I'm absolutely not hiring an actress." Autumn and Paige shared a look. The timing was absolutely perfect. "Pardon me," Autumn interrupted, flashing her most charming smile. "Couldn't help but overhear. You need a companion for some upscale event?" Blake studied her like she was a questionable witness. "You are?" "Autumn Walsh, and I have a business proposition." "Pass." He was already stepping away. $50,000. Blake froze mid-stride, spun around with sharp attention. "I need a dance partner for a competition. Winner takes 50 grand. We succeed. We split it equally. You get your money plus a classy date to impress your mother." "I don't dance." "Everyone can move to rhythm." "Same basic principle." Blake evaluated her with those penetrating lawyer eyes that probably made witnesses confess instantly. "What type of dancing?" Autumn inhaled slowly. Time for the lie that would change everything. "Waltz. Traditional ballroom style. Very refined and dignified." She strategically omitted that the competition included salsa, swing, and tango, essentially everything requiring intimate physical connection. 1 week of practice sessions. "My terms. Limited physical contact, strict timing, and when we win, you disappear from my business life forever." "Agreed." Autumn extended her hand. Blake stared at it for exactly 3 seconds before delivering the briefest possible handshake. "Thursday, 7 p.m. precisely, Walsh Dance Studio." As his stiff silhouette vanished into the Pike Place crowd, Paige whispered, "You just deceived the most meticulous attorney in Seattle about a competition that's basically dancing foreplay." "Exactly." Autumn's smile could have lit up the Space Needle. "This is going to be absolutely incredible." But watching Blake's mechanical stride disappear down First Avenue, a tiny voice wondered if she'd just committed professional suicide. The man treated handshakes like biohazards. How was she possibly going to teach him to tango? Blake arrived at Walsh Dance Studio at exactly 6:47 p.m., because arriving precisely on time would suggest he couldn't manage his schedule properly. He surveyed the space with the same scrutiny he'd use for a hostile takeover, mirrors covering every wall, practice bars that looked suspiciously unsanitized, and a faint aroma of sweat mixed with crushed dreams. Autumn emerged from the back office wearing what Blake mentally categorized as completely inappropriate workplace attire, black leggings that left nothing to imagination, and a fitted tank top that exposed entirely too much shoulder real estate. He straightened his tie defensively. "Ready to discover your inner dance god?" she asked, extending both hands toward him. Blake instinctively stepped backward. "Perhaps we could begin with some theoretical foundation." "Theory? For waltz?" Autumn laughed, a sound that somehow made Blake's chest feel strange. "Blake, Dancing isn't contract law. You can't memorize your way through it. I disagree. Everything has systematic principles and logical progressions. Okay, counselor. Here's your first lesson in dance theory. Autumn moved closer, invading what Blake considered his personal safety zone. Put your right hand on my waist. Blake stared at her waist like it might explode. Isn't there a preliminary step? Maybe we could practice the footwork separately? The footwork means nothing without frame and connection. Trust the process. I don't trust anything I can't bill hourly. Autumn rolled her eyes and grabbed his hand, placing it firmly on her waist before he could protest. Blake's entire nervous system went into overdrive. Her skin was warm through the thin fabric, and she smelled like vanilla and something distinctly female. See? You're not dying, she teased, taking his left hand in her right. Now basic waltz is just a box step. Forward side together, back side together, like walking but fancier. Blake tried to focus on her instructions, but his brain kept short-circuiting. When was the last time he'd been this close to another human being? His dry cleaner maintained more distance. Stop thinking so hard, Autumn said, apparently reading his mental panic. Just feel the music. I don't feel music. I analyze rhythmic patterns. Same thing, different vocabulary. She started moving, guiding him through the basic steps. For the first 30 seconds, Blake moved like a malfunctioning robot. His shoulders were rigid, his arms felt like steel beams, and he kept trying to lead with his left foot when she clearly indicated right. Relax, Autumn murmured. Pretend I'm a very important client you need to impress. Important clients don't require physical contact. Pretend I'm a judge, then. Something clicked. Blake's posture shifted slightly, becoming more confident. His steps grew smoother, more deliberate. They managed an entire box step without collision. There we go, Autumn smiled. See, you're practically Fred Astaire already. That's when she made her fatal mistake. Caught up in the moment, she spun under his arm, a move that definitely wasn't basic waltz. Blake, unprepared for the sudden choreography change, tried to follow her lead and somehow managed to tangle their arms together like a pretzel. They crashed into the mirror with a tremendous bang, Blake's back hitting the glass while Autumn landed squarely against his chest. For one frozen moment, they were pressed together from shoulder to knee, breathing hard, staring at each other with mutual shock. Blake's brain completely short-circuited. She was soft and warm and smelled incredible, and her lips were exactly 12 inches from his, and this was definitely not covered in any legal precedent he could recall. Well, Autumn whispered, still not moving away. That wasn't quite Fred Astaire. More like Fred Flintstone, Blake managed, his voice coming out rougher than intended. They stayed frozen like that for another heartbeat before both suddenly realized their compromising position and sprang apart like opposing magnets. Right, Autumn said, smoothing her hair nervously. Maybe we should try that again. Slower this time. Much slower, Blake agreed, adjusting his tie and trying to pretend his heart wasn't hammering like a jackhammer. But as they reset their positions, both were thinking the same dangerous thought. That crash hadn't been entirely awful. In fact, it had been the opposite of awful, and that was a problem neither of them was prepared to handle. By their third practice session, Blake had mastered the basic waltz well enough to avoid hospitalizing either of them. What he hadn't mastered was ignoring the way Autumn's laugh made his stomach do peculiar acrobatics, or how her corrections required increasingly intimate adjustments to his posture. You're improving, Autumn said, stepping back after another successful run-through. Ready to add some turns? Define some? Just simple spins. Very elegant, very waltz-appropriate. Blake should have recognized the mischievous glint in her eyes, the same look she'd had right before the mirror incident. They were mid-turn when Paige burst through the studio doors like a woman fleeing a crime scene. Autumn, emergency! I just saw the competition roster and you're never going to believe... She stopped dead, taking in the sight of Blake and Autumn in what could generously be called a romantic embrace. Oh, hi there, Mr. Morrison. Blake dropped his hands like Autumn was radioactive. Ms. Chen. It's Reynolds, actually. Paige Reynolds. She was clearly fighting back a grin. Don't mind me, just grabbing some music sheets from the music cabinet. There was no music cabinet. Everyone in the room knew it. What's the emergency? Autumn asked, stepping strategically away from Blake. Right. So I was at Starbucks near the convention center, and guess who I overheard discussing the competition? Jessica Martinez. Blake watched Autumn's face drain of color. The Jessica Martinez? From Martinez Dance Academy? The very one. 5-time national champion Jessica Martinez. And get this, she's competing with Tony Castellano. Who's Tony Castellano? Blake asked, though he suspected from Autumn's expression that he didn't want to know. Only the most decorated ballroom instructor on the West Coast, Autumn said weakly. They've won everything together, everything. Paige nodded grimly. Word is they're using this as a warm-up for nationals, so you're not just competing against random couples anymore. You're up against actual professionals. Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. When you say professionals, I mean people who've been dancing together for 15 years. People who can do lifts that require engineering degrees. People who make the couples on Dancing with the Stars look like beginners. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of Seattle traffic and Blake's mounting panic. But here's the really interesting part, Paige continued with obvious relish. Jessica was complaining about the competition format. Apparently, they're requiring all couples to perform 3 different styles randomly selected the night before. Autumn and Blake stared at each other with growing horror. 3 styles? Autumn squeaked. What 3 styles? Blake demanded, though his lawyer instincts told him he definitely didn't want the answer. Paige consulted her phone. Says here they choose from waltz, foxtrot, tango, salsa, swing, and rumba. Blake felt the blood leave his face entirely. Those other dances, they're similar to waltz, right? The silence was deafening. Right? He repeated more urgently. Well, Autumn said carefully, they all involve music. And movement, Paige added helpfully. Autumn. Blake's voice had taken on the deadly calm tone that made opposing counsel update their resumes. Please tell me these other dances don't require significantly more physical contact than waltz. Autumn bit her lip. Define significantly. Any increase whatsoever. Then no, I absolutely cannot tell you that. Blake sat down heavily on the nearest chair, which happened to be bright pink and clearly designed for someone half his size. The visual would have been hilarious under different circumstances. Let me understand this correctly, he said slowly. I agreed to learn one simple, dignified dance. Now you're informing me I may be required to perform up to 5 additional dances, all of which involve more intimate contact than I've had with another human being since my pediatrician. That's one way to put it, Autumn said. How much more contact are we discussing? Autumn and Paige exchanged glances. Well, tango involves some pretty close positioning, Paige offered diplomatically. Define close. Think aggressive snuggling, Autumn said weakly. And salsa? Imagine tango, but faster and with more hip movement. Blake put his head in his hands. I'm going to die. I'm literally going to die of physical contact overdose in front of hundreds of people. You're not going to die, Autumn said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. We just need to accelerate our training program. Blake looked up sharply. Meaning? Meaning. Autumn took a deep breath. We practice every night this week, and we learn everything. Everything? Everything. Blake stared at her for a long moment, weighing his options. $50,000 versus public humiliation and potential cardiac arrest from excessive human contact. Fine, he said finally. But I wanted on record that this was not part of our original agreement. Noted. Autumn grinned. This is going to be interesting. As Blake walked to his car that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that interesting was probably the understatement of the century. Blake stared at his reflection in the studio mirror, wondering if this was how defendants felt right before receiving life sentences. Tonight was their crash course in intimate dancing for emotionally constipated lawyers, and he was about as ready as a vegetarian at a barbecue convention. "Okay, Blake," Autumn announced, emerging from the office with a tablet and what looked like battle plans. "We're going to tackle tango first, then salsa, then swing. Think of it as aggressive negotiation set to music. I negotiate from across conference tables, not pressed against opposing counsel. Same principles, confidence, control, and making your intentions crystal clear." Autumn queued up a sultry tango on the sound system. "Except instead of destroying someone's legal arguments, you're going to seduce them into submission." Blake's brain short-circuited. "I'm sorry, what?" "Tango is about passion and power. You need to channel your inner Latin lover." "I don't have an inner Latin lover. I have an inner tax attorney, and he's extremely concerned about this entire situation." Autumn laughed, that musical sound that was becoming dangerously familiar. "Trust me, every man has tango in him somewhere, even uptight corporate lawyers." She moved toward him with a predatory grace that made Blake's pulse spike. Gone was the casual instructor from their waltz lessons. This Autumn moved like a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and exactly how to get it. "First lesson in tango," she said, placing her hands on his chest and looking up at him through her lashes. "It's about tension. Push and pull, give and take." Blake's mouth went completely dry. "That sounds intense." "It's supposed to be. Now for the basic position, you're going to hold me much closer than waltz." She stepped into him until there was barely an inch between them. "Your right hand goes low on my back. Lower, lower." "How much lower are we talking about?" "Think just north of inappropriate." Blake's hand hovered uncertainly before settling in what he hoped was the correct zone. Autumn's body was warm and soft against him, and he could feel every breath she took. Perfect. Now, unlike waltz, where we're polite dancing partners, in tango, we're lovers having an argument through movement. "I don't think I know how to argue through movement." "Sure you do. You're a lawyer. You argue for a living. Same energy, different medium." The music started, low and sultry and absolutely nothing like the elegant waltz they'd been practicing. Autumn began moving, and Blake tried to follow, but his body felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Stop thinking," Autumn murmured, her lips dangerously close to his ear. "Feel the drama. You're not Blake the lawyer right now. You're a passionate man trying to convince me to stay when I'm walking away." Something primal stirred in Blake's chest. Maybe it was the music, or the way Autumn was looking at him, or the fact that they were pressed together so tightly he could feel her heartbeat. But suddenly, he wasn't thinking about legal briefs or billing hours. He tightened his grip on her back and took a sharp step forward, forcing her to step back. Autumn's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked suspiciously like approval. "Yes," she breathed. "Just like that. Now spin me away from you like you're angry, then pull me back because you can't let me go." Blake spun her out with more force than necessary, then yanked her back against him. Their bodies collided, and for a moment they were frozen, staring at each other with mutual shock at the electricity crackling between them. "That was," Autumn started. "Intense," Blake finished, his voice rougher than usual. They were still locked in position when the studio door burst open with enough force to rattle the mirrors. "Autumn, we have a massive problem." Paige rushed in, then stopped dead at the sight of them practically melted together in what could only be described as a compromising position. "Oh, wow, that's very tango-esque." Blake and Autumn sprang apart like they'd been electrocuted. "What's wrong?" Autumn asked, smoothing her hair and trying to look professional. "Jessica Martinez just posted on Instagram. She's been spying on the competition, and she knows about you two." Blake felt his stomach drop. Define knows about us. Paige held up her phone, showing a picture of Blake and Autumn through the studio window, clearly mid-tango. The caption read, "Cute amateur couple at Walsh Studio. Going to be fun watching them crash and burn at Metro Championship. Easy win, car professionals only. Amateurs need not apply." "She posted this publicly?" Blake asked, his lawyer brain immediately shifting into damage control mode. Worse, she tagged the local news station. Apparently, uptight lawyer learns to dance is considered human interest material. Autumn sank into the pink chair. This is a disaster. Now everyone's going to be watching us fail spectacularly. Actually, Blake said slowly, his strategic mind kicking into high gear, this might work in our favor. Both women stared at him like he'd suggested they perform naked. Think about it, he continued. She set up a David versus Goliath narrative, the local underdogs against the established champions. If we somehow manage not to completely embarrass ourselves, we become the feel-good story of the year. And if we do embarrass ourselves? Autumn asked. Then we become viral videos for all the wrong reasons. Fantastic, Autumn muttered. No pressure at all. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Darling, I just saw the most interesting post on social media. Is there something you'd like to tell me about your new girlfriend? He showed the message to Autumn, who groaned. Your mother follows Jessica Martinez. Apparently, my mother follows everyone. She's like the FBI of social media. What did you tell her about me? Autumn asked curiously. Blake felt heat creep up his neck. That you're helping me with a work-related social situation. Work-related social situation? Paige snorted. Is that what we're calling tango now? Before Blake could respond, his phone rang. His mother's contact photo filled the screen, a glamorous headshot that looked like it belonged in a socialite magazine. I have to take this, he said apologetically, stepping toward the office. Hello, Mother. Through the thin walls, Autumn and Paige could hear his side of the conversation. No, she's not a professional dancer. Yes, she's attractive. Mother, that's not... No, I haven't introduced her to the family yet, because we're not... It's complicated. Mother, please don't call the society reporter. Mother. Mother. He emerged from the office, looking harried. My mother has invited you to brunch Sunday. She's apparently already called her friends to tell them about my mystery woman. I can't have brunch with your mother, Autumn protested. I don't even know how to have brunch with my own mother. What do you normally eat for brunch? Blake asked. Leftover pizza and regret. That's not going to work for Eleanor Morrison's social circle. Eleanor Morrison? Paige squeaked. Your mother is Eleanor Morrison, as in Morrison Foundation Eleanor Morrison, Seattle's Queen of Charity Galas Eleanor Morrison. Blake nodded grimly. The very one. Autumn, Paige said slowly, you realize you're fake dating Seattle royalty, right? I'm not fake dating anyone, Autumn protested. We're business partners who happen to be learning intimate choreography together. Blake and Paige stared at her. That sounded better in my head, she admitted. Blake's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news station requesting an interview about the inspiring story of love conquering social barriers through dance. They think we're a real couple, he said, showing them the message. This is spiraling completely out of control, Autumn said, starting to pace. Tomorrow we have to learn 2 more dance styles, pretend to be a couple for your mother's brunch, and somehow prepare for a competition that now has media attention. Don't forget that we're competing against actual professionals who are probably laughing themselves to sleep right now, Paige added helpfully. Blake loosened his tie, a gesture that Autumn was beginning to recognize as his tell for extreme stress. We need a strategy. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. What do you suggest? Autumn asked. We commit fully to the charade. We practice until we're competent enough not to humiliate ourselves. We present a united front to the media and my family, and we win this thing out of pure spite. Spite? Autumn raised an eyebrow. Jessica Martinez wants to embarrass us publicly. I don't like being embarrassed, and I really don't like losing. Autumn felt a smile tugging at her lips. This was a side of Blake she hadn't seen before. Competitive, determined, maybe even a little dangerous. All right, counselor, she said, extending her hand. Partners in crime? Blake shook it, his grip firm and warm. Partners in crime. But as their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, both were thinking the same dangerous thought. This fake relationship was starting to feel suspiciously real. And that was the most terrifying complication of all. Blake stood outside the Four Seasons Hotel wearing his best suit and what he suspected might be a stress rash. In exactly 30 minutes, he was supposed to charm his way through brunch with his mother, while pretending to be madly in love with a woman he'd known for exactly 1 week. A woman who was currently 15 minutes late and probably having a complete mental breakdown in her apartment. His phone buzzed with a text from Autumn. Can't find anything appropriate for brunch with Seattle royalty. Currently trying to make yoga pants look formal. Send help. Before Blake could respond, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Autumn, and Blake's brain temporarily stopped functioning. Gone were the comfortable leggings and tank tops. Instead, she wore a navy blue dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. Her hair swept up in a way that made her neck look impossibly graceful. "Where did you—" Blake started, then stopped himself before he said something embarrassing about how beautiful she looked. "Paige has a fairy godmother complex," Autumn explained, smoothing the dress nervously. "She raided her sister's closet and gave me a crash course in how to brunch with the 1%. Did you know there are actual rules about which fork to use for fruit?" 7 different rules, actually, Blake said without thinking. "Of course you know that." Autumn took a shaky breath. "Okay, before we go in there and I inevitably embarrass both of us, we need to get our story straight. How long have we been dating? How did we meet? What's my favorite color? Do I have any weird habits your mother should know about?" Blake guided her toward the hotel entrance, his hand settling naturally on the small of her back. "We've been seeing each other for 3 months. We met when you came to my office about a business matter. Your favorite color is—" He paused, studying her face. "Green. The same shade as your eyes when you're concentrating on choreography." Autumn stopped walking and stared at him. "You've been paying attention to my eye color during dance practice?" Blake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm a detail-oriented person. I notice things. What else have you noticed?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address. Blake was saved from answering by the appearance of his mother sweeping across the hotel lobby like she owned the place, which she very well might. Eleanor Morrison was everything Autumn had expected and more. Tall, elegant, wearing pearls that probably cost more than Autumn's annual rent, and possessed of the kind of poise that came from generations of excellent breeding and Swiss finishing schools. "Darling," Eleanor embraced Blake with the kind of careful hug that didn't wrinkle clothing. "And you must be the mysterious Autumn I've heard absolutely nothing about until yesterday." "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Morrison," Autumn said, extending her hand with what she hoped was appropriate formality. Eleanor bypassed the handshake entirely and pulled Autumn into an elegant embrace. "Please, call me Eleanor. Any woman who can convince my son to take up dancing is clearly a miracle worker." "Blake's actually quite talented," Autumn said, surprised to realize she meant it. "He's very dedicated to perfection. A family trait," Eleanor said with obvious pride. "Shall we? I've reserved our usual table." Their usual table turned out to be a prime spot overlooking Elliott Bay, with service so attentive it bordered on telepathic. Within minutes they were seated with mimosas and an array of artfully arranged brunch items that looked too beautiful to eat. "So, Autumn," Eleanor said, settling in for what was clearly going to be an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. "Blake mentioned you own a dance studio. How fascinating. Tell me, is it profitable?" Blake nearly choked on his orange juice. "Mother." "What?" "It's a reasonable question. I'm simply interested in Autumn's entrepreneurial ventures." Autumn felt a familiar knot in her stomach. "Actually, we're facing some challenges. The economy hasn't been kind to small arts businesses." "I see. And that's how you met Blake? Professional consultation regarding financial difficulties?" "Something like that," Autumn said carefully, shooting Blake a look that clearly said, "Help me." "Mother," Blake interjected smoothly, "perhaps we could discuss something other than business. Autumn was just telling me about her family's history with dance." Autumn latched onto the lifeline gratefully. Yes, my grandmother actually started the studio. She was a Broadway dancer in the 50s before she moved to Seattle. Broadway. Eleanor's eyes lit up with genuine interest. How wonderfully romantic. I've always admired performers, such dedication to their craft. For the next hour, Autumn found herself relaxing despite the intimidating setting. Eleanor was sharp and occasionally cutting, but there was a genuine warmth underneath the aristocratic exterior. She told stories about Seattle's social scene that were both scandalous and hilarious, and she seemed genuinely interested in Autumn's thoughts on everything from city politics to the best coffee in Pike Place Market. "You know," Eleanor said as they finished their main courses, "I was beginning to worry about Blake. He works entirely too much and socializes far too little. I was starting to think he'd marry his law books." "Mother," Blake warned, but there was affection in his tone. "I'm simply saying that it's lovely to see him softer, more human." Eleanor smiled at Autumn. "You've been good for him." Autumn felt a dangerous warmth spread through her chest. This was supposed to be fake, a business arrangement with clear boundaries. But sitting here, watching Blake laugh at his mother's stories, seeing him relax in ways she'd never witnessed at the studio, she was starting to forget where the pretense ended and reality began. That's when her phone buzzed with an urgent text from Paige. "Emergency. Competition moved up to tomorrow night. They had a venue cancellation. You have 24 hours. Autumn must have gone pale because both Blake and Eleanor immediately noticed. "Is everything all right, dear?" Eleanor asked. "The dance competition," Autumn said weakly, showing Blake the message. "It's tomorrow." Blake's face went through several expressions before settling on grim determination. "Well, then we'd better get practicing." "Dance competition?" Eleanor's eyebrows rose with interest. "How exciting. What kind of competition?" "Ballroom," Blake said simply. "We're competing for prize money to help save the studio." Eleanor clapped her hands together with delight. "How wonderfully romantic, like something from a movie. I simply must attend." "Oh, that's not necessary," Autumn said quickly, imagining Eleanor's reaction to their inevitable spectacular failure. "Nonsense. I wouldn't miss it for the world. In fact, I'll call my friends. We'll make it a proper cheering section." Blake and Autumn exchanged horrified looks. Bad enough they were going to embarrass themselves in front of strangers. Now they'd be humiliating themselves in front of Seattle high society. "Mother," Blake said carefully, "perhaps you should keep expectations modest. We've only been practicing for a week. Darling, with the right partner, some things are simply natural." Eleanor's smile was positively mischievous. "Besides, I have a good feeling about you two. Call it maternal intuition." An hour later, Blake and Autumn stood outside the hotel in a state of mutual panic. 24 hours, Autumn said, staring at her phone as if the text might change. 24 hours, Blake repeated, to learn 2 additional dance styles well enough not to completely humiliate ourselves in front of my mother and her social circle. Plus the local news crew that's definitely going to be there now. Plus Jessica Martinez, who's probably practicing victory speeches. They stood in contemplative silence for a moment, watching Seattle traffic and contemplating their imminent doom. "We could withdraw," Autumn said finally. "We could," Blake agreed, "except then Jessica wins by default. Your studio gets foreclosed, and I have to explain to my mother why her new favorite person disappeared." "When you put it like that." "Exactly." Blake straightened his shoulders with the same determination he brought to impossible legal cases. "We're going to need caffeine, carbohydrates, and possibly a miracle. I know a place that has excellent coffee and pastries. The miracle we might have to improvise. I'm a lawyer. Improvisation is basically my job description." As they walked toward Autumn's car, Blake's hand found hers almost without conscious thought. Their fingers intertwined naturally, and for a moment it felt less like a performance and more like something real. "Blake," Autumn said as they reached her car. "Yeah? For what it's worth, I think your mother likes me." Blake squeezed her hand gently. "For what it's worth, I think that makes 2 of us." The comment hung between them as they drove toward the studio, both trying to ignore the fact that somewhere between the tango lessons and the family brunch, their fake relationship had started developing some very real feelings. Back at the studio, they found Paige surrounded by what looked like the contents of a small library: dance instruction books, laptop computers, and several tablets all streaming different choreography videos. "Okay," Paige announced without preamble. "I've been researching our competition all morning. The good news is that Jessica and Tony aren't the only serious couple. There are at least 3 other professional-level partnerships." "How is that good news?" Blake asked. "Because it means even if you don't beat Jessica specifically, you could still place well enough to win prize money. The competition has multiple cash prizes, not just winner-take-all." Autumn felt a tiny spark of hope. "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that I've watched footage of the other couples, and they're all basically dance gods. Also, the competition format is being live-streamed on the event's social media, so if you mess up, it's going to be preserved for internet eternity." Blake loosened his tie, his stress tell that Autumn was becoming very familiar with. "Wonderful. Anything else we should know?" "Actually, yes." Paige consulted one of her tablets. "I found the competition rules. Each couple has to perform 3 dances. 1 they choose and 2 randomly selected an hour before competition. But here's the interesting part. There's a wild card element." "Define wild card," Autumn said with growing dread. "Each couple gets 1 adaptation dance where they have to incorporate a prop or theme chosen by audience vote. Things like dance with umbrellas, or incorporate a chair, or tell a story through movement." Blake sat down heavily on the pink chair. "So not only do we have to master multiple dance styles in the next 18 hours, we also have to be prepared to improvise with random objects." "That's one way to put it." "This is insane," Autumn said, starting to pace. "We're going to look like complete amateurs." "We are complete amateurs," Blake pointed out with lawyer-like precision. "But maybe," Paige said slowly, "that's not entirely a bad thing." Both Blake and Autumn turned to stare at her. "Think about it. Everyone expects you to fail. Jessica's practically counting on it. But what if instead of trying to be perfect, you lean into being authentic?" "Authentic?" Blake repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. "You two have something the professional couples don't. Genuine chemistry that's still developing. When you dance together, there's this tension, like you're discovering each other in real time." Autumn felt her cheeks warm. "We're just learning the choreography." "Right," Paige said with obvious skepticism. "And I'm sure that's why Blake was staring at you like you hung the moon during the tango yesterday." "I was not," Blake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "The point is," Paige continued, "instead of trying to execute perfect technical moves, maybe you should focus on telling your story. The unlikely partnership, the opposites who found common ground, the fake relationship that's becoming something real." The last sentence hung in the air like a challenge. Blake and Autumn carefully avoided looking at each other. "So, what do you suggest?" Autumn asked finally. "I suggest we spend the next 18 hours not just learning steps, but figuring out who Blake and Autumn are when they dance together. And then we show that to the judges, the audience, and especially to Jessica Martinez." Blake stood up slowly, his strategic mind clearly working. "You're suggesting we turn our inexperience into our advantage?" "Exactly. David versus Goliath, Rocky versus Apollo Creed, the little engine that could versus very intimidating dance trains." "That might be the worst metaphor you've ever used," Autumn said, but she was smiling. "But the strategy is sound," Blake said thoughtfully. "We can't compete on technical skill, so we compete on authenticity and emotional connection." "Can we do that?" Autumn asked. "Create authentic emotional connection in 18 hours? Blake met her eyes and something passed between them. Understanding, possibility, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. "I think," he said quietly, "we might have more to work with than we realized." As they prepared for the most intense practice session of their lives, None of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, Jessica Martinez, taking notes and photos, her expression a mixture of amusement and calculation. The game was about to get much more complicated. The Seattle Convention Center buzzed with an energy that made Blake's skin crawl and his palms sweat simultaneously. Everywhere he looked, impossibly graceful couples glided through warm-up routines that looked like poetry, written in human movement. Professional dancers stretched with casual elegance, their bodies moving in ways that seemed to defy basic anatomy. Meanwhile, Blake was pretty sure he'd forgotten how to walk in a straight line, let alone execute a proper tango. "Breathe," Autumn murmured beside him, adjusting his bow tie for what had to be the 7th time in the past 10 minutes. She looked absolutely stunning in a flowing emerald dress that brought out her eyes and moved like liquid silk when she walked. But Blake could see the nervous energy radiating from her like visible heat waves. "I am breathing," he replied, though his voice sounded like he'd been gargling gravel. "This is me breathing in a completely normal, non-panicked fashion. No, you're hyperventilating in a very controlled, lawyer-like way that's honestly impressive in its precision." Blake tried to loosen his shoulders, but they felt like they'd been carved from granite. Around them, the competition buzzed with activity that would have been overwhelming under normal circumstances. The Seattle Convention Center had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a ballroom and a television studio. Professional lighting rigs cast everything in dramatic shadows, multiple camera crews moved with practiced efficiency, and the audience section was filling with what looked like half of Seattle's social elite, mixed with genuine dance enthusiasts. "How can you be so calm about this?" Blake asked, watching a couple execute a series of spins that looked like they were defying gravity. "Who says I'm calm?" Autumn gestured subtly to her hands, which were trembling like autumn leaves in a windstorm. "I'm absolutely terrified, but terror and calm can coexist if you practice enough mental gymnastics." Before Blake could respond to this questionable philosophy, a camera crew materialized in front of them like a particularly unwelcome apparition. The reporter, a perfectly coiffed woman with teeth that could probably be seen from orbit and hair that defied several laws of physics, thrust a microphone toward them with predatory enthusiasm. "Blake Morrison and Autumn Walsh," she chirped with the kind of aggressive perkiness that belonged in a horror movie. "Channel 7 News. We'd absolutely love to get a quick interview about your inspiring journey from courtroom adversaries to dance partners to passionate lovers." "Lovers?" Blake's voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy asking someone to prom. "The human interest angle is absolutely fantastic," the reporter continued with the single-minded focus of a shark scenting blood. "Ruthless corporate lawyer falls head over heels for the small business owner he's supposed to be shutting down, and they discover true love through the transformative power of dance. It's like something straight from a Nicholas Sparks novel." Autumn and Blake exchanged looks of mutual panic that would have been comical under different circumstances. Somewhere in the translation from reality to media narrative, their carefully constructed business arrangement had been transformed into an epic romance for the ages. "Actually," Autumn started, clearly intending to set the record straight, but Blake placed a gentle but firm hand on her arm. "We prefer to let our dancing speak for itself," he said, smoothly channeling the courtroom composure that had served him well in front of hostile judges and opposing counsel. "If you'll excuse us, we really need to prepare for our performance." As they escaped toward the competitors' area, weaving through a maze of sequined costumes and serious-looking couples doing impossibly complex stretches, Autumn hissed, "How did they get the idea that we're madly in love?" "Probably because you two keep staring at each other like you've discovered fire," Paige announced, appearing beside them with an armload of water bottles, towels, and what looked like enough stage makeup to supply a small theater production. "Also, your mother has been making the rounds with Seattle's social elite, explaining to anyone who will listen that you two are destined for each other by the hand of fate itself," she added to Blake with obvious amusement. Blake felt his stress levels spike into previously uncharted territory. "My mother said what exactly?" "She's over there by the VIP section, holding court with what looks like half the Seattle Country Club, giving a detailed analysis of how she knew from the very moment she met Autumn that wedding bells were not just inevitable, but cosmically predetermined. Blake followed Paige's gesture and spotted his mother across the massive convention hall. Eleanor was surrounded by an impressive collection of designer gowns, distinguished gentlemen in tailored tuxedos, and enough jewelry to fund a small nation's GDP. She was gesturing with theatrical flair, clearly in full storytelling mode, and judging by her audience's rapt attention, she was delivering a performance worthy of Broadway. "This is spinning completely out of control," Blake muttered, loosening his tie in what Autumn now recognized as his primary stress response. "We agreed to a simple business partnership. Now apparently we're the Romeo and Juliet of the ballroom dance world." "Actually," Autumn said thoughtfully, her mind clearly working through possibilities, "maybe we can use this to our advantage." "Use what exactly?" "Everyone's expectations, the narrative they've created. They want a love story? We give them a love story. Not the fabricated one the media invented, but the real one." Blake felt his pulse spike in a way that had nothing to do with performance anxiety. "The real one?" Autumn turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen them. "Blake, we need to talk about what's been happening between us. What's been building every single day we've practiced together." "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the sound system with game show host enthusiasm, interrupting what might have been the most important conversation of Blake's life. "Welcome to the Metro Dance Championship. Competitors, please gather around the main stage for our random dance selection ceremony." "Perfect timing," Blake said dryly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. They joined the crowd of couples around a large spinning wheel that looked like it belonged on a television game show, complete with dramatic lighting and suspenseful music. Blake counted at least 25 couples, and every single one of them looked like they'd stepped directly out of a professional dance catalog. The women were all impossible combinations of grace and athleticism, while the men moved with the kind of confident precision that came from years of training. "Our first mandatory dance selection is..." The announcer, a man whose enthusiasm could power a small city, spun the wheel with theatrical flair that would have made a Vegas performer proud. The wheel clicked through possibilities: foxtrot, rumba, quickstep, waltz, before finally landing on salsa. A cheer went up from several couples who were clearly thrilled with the selection. Blake felt his stomach drop straight through the floor and possibly into the building's basement. "Second mandatory selection." The wheel spun again, this time seeming to take forever as it clicked past various options. Blake found himself actually hoping for waltz, the one dance he felt moderately confident about. The wheel slowed, wavered between tango and foxtrot, then settled definitively on tango. Blake's knees went weak. Of all the possible combinations in the known universe, they'd gotten the two most intimate, contact-heavy, technically demanding dances in the entire ballroom repertoire. "And your third dance will be each couple's free choice, performed with today's audience-selected prop." The announcer reached into what looked like a magician's hat and pulled out silk scarves. Blake turned to Autumn with what he was absolutely certain was a look of pure, undiluted terror. "Silk scarves? It's fine," Autumn said, though her voice was slightly higher than usual and her smile looked a bit forced. "We can totally work with scarves. Scarves are flowy, romantic, completely manageable. I don't know how to be romantic with fabric accessories." "Then it's a good thing you're learning how to be romantic with me." The words hung between them like a challenge, loaded with everything they'd been carefully not discussing for the past week. Blake felt something shift in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like hope mixed with absolute terror. "Autumn," Blake started, but she was already pulling him toward their designated warm-up area. "We'll figure out the scarf choreography later. Right now, we need to focus on not completely embarrassing ourselves during the salsa." For the next hour, they ran through their routines with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Other couples around them moved through their practice sessions with the calm confidence of seasoned professionals, But Blake and Autumn attacked each dance like they were cramming for the most important exam of their lives. The salsa felt better than it had any right to, their bodies moving together with a synchronization that continued to surprise them both. Blake was finally starting to understand the rhythm, the give and take that made the dance work. When Autumn spun away from him, he no longer panicked about when to bring her back. When she pressed close during the intimate sections, he no longer felt like his brain was short-circuiting. The tango, however, remained dangerous territory. Every time they locked eyes during the dramatic pauses, Blake felt like he was drowning in possibilities he wasn't ready to name. The dance required a level of emotional vulnerability that his carefully constructed defenses weren't designed to handle. "Stop overthinking it," Autumn said during one of their practice runs, her hands on his chest as they held the final pose. "I can literally see the gears turning in your head." "I think better than I feel," Blake admitted. "It's served me well in courtrooms." "This isn't a courtroom, this is—" She paused, searching for the right words. "This is us. Just us. No judges, no jury, no legal precedents to cite. Just two people telling a story." "What story are we telling?" Autumn's smile was soft and a little sad. "I guess that depends on whether you're ready to be honest about what this is." Before Blake could ask what she meant, the announcement came. "Places, everyone. We'll begin with couple number 1. Blake and Autumn were couple number 17 out of 25. They settled into the audience section to watch the competition, and Blake's confidence evaporated like morning mist. These weren't just good dancers. They were artists, storytellers, athletes, and poets all rolled into impossibly graceful packages. The first couple, Marcus and Diana Rodriguez, performed a salsa that looked like controlled fire. Every movement was precise, passionate, and perfectly synchronized. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building's foundation. "We're going to look like kindergartners at a doctoral defense," Blake whispered to Autumn, his voice barely audible over the applause. "Maybe," she whispered back, her hand finding his in the darkness. "But we're going to be the most authentic kindergartners anyone's ever seen." Couple after couple took the stage, each performance more impressive than the last. There were couples who'd clearly been dancing together for decades, moving with the kind of unspoken communication that came from thousands of hours of practice. There were younger pairs with athletic ability that seemed to defy physics. There were elegant older couples who danced with the wisdom that came from truly understanding their art form. Jessica Martinez and Tony Castellano were couple number 12. Blake watched with growing dread as they took the floor for their salsa. They moved like liquid fire given human form, each step perfectly executed, each turn completed with flawless precision. Jessica's dress sparkled under the lights like captured starlight, and Tony moved with the kind of masculine grace that made other men question their fundamental understanding of movement. The audience erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. Blake noticed several people in the crowd taking pictures, and he was pretty sure he heard someone whisper about championship-level performance. "Well," Blake said quietly, his mouth dry as desert sand, "at least we know what perfection looks like." "That's not perfection," Autumn said, surprising him with the certainty in her voice. "That's technical excellence. There's a difference." "Explain." "Watch their faces during the next dance. They're beautiful, flawless, completely synchronized, and totally disconnected from each other emotionally. They're performing the choreography, not feeling the dance." Blake studied Jessica and Tony more carefully during their tango routine. Autumn was right. Despite their obvious technical skill and years of training, there was something cold about their performance. Professional, polished, impressive, but somehow empty. They hit every mark, executed every move with precision, but Blake couldn't see any real emotion in their eyes when they looked at each other. "It's like watching beautiful robots," Autumn murmured. "Technically perfect, but missing the soul." More couples performed, each bringing their own style and story to the stage. Blake began to notice what Autumn meant. Some of the most technically impressive couples felt emotionally distant, while some of the less polished performances had moments of genuine connection that made the audience lean forward in their seats. Couple number 17, the announcer called with game show host enthusiasm. Blake Morrison and Autumn Walsh. Blake's legs turned to jelly. Around them, he could hear murmurs from the audience. Probably people wondering how two obvious amateurs had made it into a competition filled with seasoned professionals. He spotted his mother in the VIP section, giving him an encouraging thumbs up that somehow made him feel both better and worse simultaneously. They walked to the center of the stage, and suddenly Blake was hyper-aware of everything. The bright lights that felt hot enough to melt steel, the crowd that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, the camera crews recording every moment for posterity, his mother's encouraging smile from the VIP section. But most of all, he was aware of Autumn beside him, radiant and nervous, and looking at him like he was the only person in the entire universe. "Ready?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of his hammering heartbeat. "Absolutely not," he whispered back, his mouth dry as sand. "Let's do this anyway." The salsa music began with a burst of brass and percussion that seemed to fill every corner of the massive space. For the first few beats, Blake's mind went completely, utterly blank. He stood frozen like a deer in headlights, every dance step he'd ever learned evaporating from his memory like morning fog. Then Autumn stepped into him, her hand finding his chest, her eyes locking with his, and suddenly everything else faded away. The crowd, the cameras, the other couples, the pressure, all of it disappeared until there was only the music, only her, only the story they were telling together through movement. They weren't technically perfect. Blake missed a turn during the second sequence. Autumn stumbled slightly during a particularly complex spin combination. But something magical was happening. They were dancing like they meant it, like the movements mattered, like they were sharing secrets through the language of their bodies. Blake found himself actually enjoying the performance. When Autumn spun away from him, he felt the absence like a physical ache. When she spun back into his arms, it felt like coming home. The salsa's playful energy suited them somehow. All flirtation and chase and the kind of joy that came from moving together in perfect synchronization. The audience seemed to sense the authenticity of their performance. Blake could hear excited murmurs during their routine, rather than just polite silence, scattered applause for particularly well-executed sequences. When they finished with Autumn dipped low in his arms, both of them breathing hard and grinning like idiots, the applause was warm and enthusiastic. That was... Autumn started, her face flushed and glowing with exertion and happiness. "Amazing," Blake finished, helping her to her feet. We totally did." They barely had time to catch their breath and process what had just happened before the tango music began. Slow, sultry, and absolutely loaded with the kind of dramatic tension that made Blake's pulse spike into dangerous territory. This was it. The dance that had started everything. The dance where they'd first felt that dangerous spark of connection. The dance that required them to be more emotionally vulnerable than Blake had ever been in his entire carefully controlled life. Blake pulled Autumn close, closer than he'd ever dared in practice, close enough to feel her heartbeat against his chest. He looked directly into her green eyes and forgot about everything else, the audience, the competition, the cameras, the fact that his mother was probably recording this on her phone to show at future family gatherings. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about truth. The tango was poetry written in human movement. Every step, every turn, every dramatic pause spoke of desire and conflict, and the kind of passion that changes everything fundamental about a person's world. Blake had never felt so intensely connected to another human being. When he spun Autumn away from him, it felt like losing part of his soul. When he pulled her back, it felt like breathing again. They moved together like they'd been dancing this dance their entire lives, like every step had been choreographed by fate itself. Blake found himself taking risks he'd never attempted in practice, dipping Autumn lower, holding eye contact longer, putting emotion into every movement that he'd spent his entire adult life keeping carefully locked away. The audience had gone completely silent, caught up in the story they were telling. Blake could sense the attention focused on them like a physical weight, but instead of making him nervous, it felt empowering. They had something to say, and people were listening. They ended in the classic tango pose. Autumn bent backward over his arm, their faces inches apart, both breathing hard and staring at each other with undisguised wonder, and something that looked suspiciously like love. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Blake could hear his own heartbeat, could see the rise and fall of Autumn's chest, could smell the vanilla scent of her hair. For a moment he forgot they were on a stage in front of hundreds of people. Then the audience exploded into applause that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Blake helped Autumn to her feet, and they stood there in the center of the stage, holding hands and trying to process what had just happened. That hadn't been a performance. That had been a revelation, a confession, a moment of truth so honest it left them both feeling exposed and exhilarated. "One more dance," the announcer called over the continuing applause. "Your choice dance, incorporating silk scarves." They'd barely discussed what they were going to do for their final performance. In all the chaos of preparation, compressed practice schedules, and media attention, they'd focused on the required dances and left their free choice as an afterthought to figure out in the moment. "What do we do?" Blake asked as a stagehand approached with 2 lengths of deep blue silk that seemed to shimmer under the stage lights. "We tell the truth," Autumn said simply, taking the scarves and letting the silk flow through her fingers. "What truth?" "Our truth, the real story of Blake and Autumn, who we were when we met, who we're becoming, and who we might be together." The music began, not one of their practiced routines, but a slow, contemporary piece that spoke of transformation and discovery, and the kind of change that happens when 2 people find something unexpected in each other. Without discussing it, without planning choreography or counting beats, they began to move. It started with distance. Blake and Autumn on opposite sides of the stage, the silk scarves creating barriers between them, representing all the walls they'd built around their hearts over the years. Blake moved with the rigid control that had defined his life, while Autumn danced with careful independence, both of them beautiful in isolation, but somehow incomplete. Slowly, carefully, they began to approach each other. The scarves became bridges instead of barriers, connections instead of separation. When Blake reached for Autumn through the silk, and she reached back, the audience held its collective breath. What followed was the most honest 3 minutes of Blake's life. Every movement spoke of his journey from rigid control to vulnerability, from isolation to connection. Every step showed Autumn's transformation from defensive independence to trust, from protecting her heart to opening it completely. The scarves wove around them, binding them together, then flowing free as they learned to move as one while remaining themselves. It was a dance about partnership in its truest form. 2 complete people choosing to create something together that was greater than either could be alone. When the music swelled toward its climax, Blake lifted Autumn, spinning her through the air with the silk scarves flowing around them like wings. When he set her down, they were standing in the center of the stage, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, surrounded by fallen silk scarves like the remnants of all their old defenses. The silence was deafening. Then someone in the audience started to clap, slowly at first, then building until it became a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Blake could see people in the crowd wiping their eyes, could hear someone actually cheering their names. "Well," Blake said quietly, his voice shaky with emotion, "I think we just told everyone exactly how we feel about each other." "Yeah," Autumn whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and something that looked like pure joy. "We did." They were still holding each other when the announcer called for all couples to return to the stage for the final judging. Blake couldn't focus on anything except the woman in his arms, and the realization that somewhere between the first awkward waltz lesson and this moment, everything fundamental about his life had changed. The other couples gathered on stage, each looking confident and professional in their own way. Jessica and Tony stood near the center, clearly expecting to be called as winners. Blake noticed Jessica shooting glances in their direction, not worried exactly, but perhaps slightly less certain than she'd appeared before their performances. The scoring for tonight's competition was based on technical execution, artistic interpretation, and audience connection, the announcer explained, building dramatic tension with the skill of a seasoned performer. Our panel of 5 professional judges scored each couple on all 3 dances, with a possible total score of 1,000 points. Blake felt Autumn's hand tighten in his. Around them, other couples stood with the practiced composure of people accustomed to competition results. Blake tried to summon some of his courtroom calm, but his heart was beating too fast, and he was still processing the emotional intensity of their final performance. In 5th place, with a total score of 821 points, David and Michelle Thompson. Applause filled the air as a younger couple stepped forward to accept their ribbon and prize money. They looked thrilled just to place in the top 5. 4th place with a total score of 847 points, Marcus and Diana Rodriguez. The couple who'd opened the competition with such fire accepted their ribbon with gracious smiles. Blake noticed they seemed genuinely happy with their placement. 3rd place, with a total score of 868 points, Robert and Catherine Hayes. More applause. Blake's palms were starting to sweat. 3 couples left, including Jessica and Tony, who were still standing with confident postures near center stage. The 2nd place winners, with a total score of 889 points. The announcer paused for dramatic effect that probably violated several Geneva Convention articles against torture. Jessica Martinez and Tony Castellano. Blake blinked in complete shock. Jessica and Tony hadn't won. He watched as they stepped forward to accept their silver medals, their smiles professional, but not quite hiding their obvious disappointment and confusion. Jessica's eyes swept the remaining couples with what looked like genuine bewilderment. That left only 2 couples on stage, Blake and Autumn, and an older pair named Frank and Margaret Williams, who delivered consistently solid performances all evening. And your Metro Dance Championship winners, the announcer boomed with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a moon landing. With a total score of 923 points, Blake Morrison and Autumn Walsh. The world exploded into noise and light and chaos that Blake's brain couldn't quite process. Confetti cannons went off, cameras flashed like lightning, and the audience erupted into cheers that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Blake stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. His mind stuck on repeat. We won. We actually won. How did we win? Then Autumn threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with everything she had. Joy, triumph, love, gratitude, and about 17 other emotions all rolled into one perfect moment. The kiss lasted exactly long enough for Blake to realize that this was what he'd been missing his entire carefully ordered life. This connection, this passion, this woman who'd turned his world completely upside down and made it infinitely, immeasurably better. When they finally broke apart, the crowd was still cheering. Camera crews were capturing every moment for what would probably become Seattle's most watched local news segment ever. And his mother was crying happy tears in the VIP section while applauding like her life depended on it. We won, Autumn said, her voice full of wonder and disbelief and pure joy. We won, Blake agreed, though he was pretty sure the competition had been the least important victory of the evening. The next few hours passed in a blur of interviews, photographs, and celebrations that felt surreal. The prize money, $50,000 split between 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place, was enough to save the studio with money left over for improvements. But more than that, Blake found himself genuinely enjoying the attention for once in his life, especially when it involved watching Autumn glow with happiness and pride. Eleanor Morrison, of course, was in full social butterfly mode, introducing Autumn to everyone in Seattle high society and somehow managing to work their love story into every conversation. Blake overheard her telling the mayor's wife that she'd known from the first moment that Blake and Autumn were destined for matrimonial bliss. Your mother is planning our wedding, Autumn whispered to Blake during a brief moment between interviews. She's planned my wedding since I was 12, Blake replied. I just never gave her an appropriate bride before. The local news interviews were surprisingly fun, largely because Blake discovered that Autumn was naturally gifted at handling media attention. She was charming without being fake, gracious without being boring, and somehow managed to make their unlikely partnership sound both romantic and relatable. "What's next for you two?" asked the Channel 7 reporter who'd ambushed them earlier. Blake and Autumn looked at each other, and Blake realized they hadn't actually discussed anything beyond getting through the competition. "Well," Autumn said with a smile that could have powered the entire city, "we're definitely going to keep dancing together." "And?" the reporter prompted, clearly fishing for engagement announcements. "And we're going to see where this amazing partnership takes us," Blake said diplomatically, though his eyes were saying considerably more to Autumn than his words were saying to the camera. Later, much later, after the last interview had been conducted and the final photograph had been taken, after Eleanor had finished introducing Autumn to what seemed like half of Seattle's social register, after the other couples had congratulated them with varying degrees of genuine enthusiasm, Blake and Autumn found themselves alone in the studio where it all began. The space felt different now, not just because of the first-place trophy sitting on the front desk, or the prize check that would save the business, but because everything fundamental about their relationship had changed in the space of one evening. "So," Autumn said, perching on the edge of the mirror ledge, still wearing her emerald dress but with her hair falling loose around her shoulders and her face glowing with exhaustion and happiness, "we should probably talk about what happens now." Blake loosened his bow tie and sat down on the infamous pink chair that had started this whole adventure. "Probably. The studio is safe. More than safe, actually. The prize money will cover the loan, plus renovations, plus enough marketing to actually compete with the fancy studio across town. That's good. That's what we wanted. And your mother will have enough material to entertain her social circle for the next decade. She's already planning what she's calling the wedding of the century. So yes." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had changed between them. The studio was quiet except for the distant sound of Seattle traffic and the occasional settling noise from the building. "Blake," Autumn said finally, her voice soft. "Yeah? When I said we should tell our truth tonight, I wasn't just talking about the choreography." Blake met her eyes, seeing all the vulnerability and hope and possibility he'd been trying to ignore for days. Neither was I. "So what is our truth, really?" Blake stood up and walked over to her, stopping close enough to touch but not quite touching, giving her space to back away if she wanted to. "Our truth is that you terrify me. You've turned everything I thought I knew about myself completely upside down. You make me want to be spontaneous and take risks and feel things I've spent my entire adult life carefully avoiding." "And?" Autumn prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm completely, hopelessly, irrevocably in love with you." Autumn's smile could have powered the entire Pacific Northwest. "Well, that's convenient." "Convenient? Because I'm completely, hopelessly, irrevocably in love with you too." When Blake kissed her this time, there were no cameras, no audience, no judges to impress. Just two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and realized that sometimes the best things in life come from the biggest risks. "So," Blake said when they finally came up for air, his forehead resting against hers, "what do we do now?" "Now?" Autumn grinned, pulling him toward the center of the studio where they'd spent so many hours learning to move together. "Now we dance. Not for judges or audiences or prize money. Just for us." As they swayed together in the quiet studio, Blake reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 1 week. He'd entered into what he thought was a simple business arrangement and had somehow discovered the most important thing he'd never known he was missing. The music was just their own heartbeats and the rhythm of their breathing, but it was perfect. Blake spun Autumn slowly in the moonlight streaming through the windows, and she laughed with pure joy, the sound he was already completely addicted to. "Autumn," he said, pulling her close again. Remind me to send Jessica Martinez a thank you note." "Why?" because if she hadn't posted that picture, if she hadn't tried to embarrass us publicly, none of this would have happened. We never would have had the push we needed to stop pretending this was just business. Autumn laughed again, the sound echoing off the mirrors. You want to thank the woman who tried to destroy us. I want to thank the woman who accidentally gave us exactly what we needed to stop being afraid and start living. They danced until the sun started to rise over Seattle, casting golden light through the studio windows and illuminating the space where two impossibly different people had found something neither of them had been looking for. 1 year later, Blake and Autumn's wedding was indeed the social event of the season, just as Eleanor had predicted. They held the ceremony at the Four Seasons, Eleanor insisted, but the reception was at the newly renovated Walsh Dance Studio, where their friends and family could watch the newlyweds perform the tango that had started everything. Jessica Martinez sent a congratulations card, along with a note admitting that their authentic connection had inspired her to work on bringing more genuine emotion into her own performances. She and Tony had placed second in the national championships, and she credited watching Blake and Autumn's fearless vulnerability with helping her break through as an artist. The joint law practice and dance studio, Morrison and Walsh Legal Services and Life Lessons, became one of Seattle's most popular destinations for couples looking to strengthen their relationships. Blake discovered he had a talent for teaching nervous businessmen how to dance for their weddings, while Autumn found she enjoyed helping people navigate the legal aspects of starting small businesses. They kept the pink chair in the corner of the main studio as a reminder that the best things in life often come in the most ridiculous packages. Above it, they hung a framed photo from the competition, the moment right after they'd won, when they were holding each other and laughing with pure joy, surrounded by confetti and looking like two people who'd just discovered that fairy tales could actually come true. But the real magic happened every evening, when they closed the studio and danced together in the quiet space where they'd learned that sometimes taking 2 steps toward disaster was actually taking 2 steps toward the most perfect destiny imaginable. And they lived happily, joyfully, dancingly ever after,